An influence hidden in the shadows up until the late 1990s was a significant shaper of the world of cyberpunk that we see in the year 2077. It is perhaps one of the worst organizations to exist in cyberpunk, perhaps even more evil than Arasaka Corporation and a few other entities. A secret cabal embedded deep inside of the United States government would be party to at least 3 ensuing decades of violence and instability that saw to global shortages of food, the usage of bioengineered plague weapons, and the growth of mega-corporate power in the 21st century. That cabal, according to the Home of the Brave Cyberpunk sourcebook, is called the Gang of Four, which was made up of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Drug Enforcement Agency. While we don't know exactly how this cabal was formed, we do know that the seeds of it were sown as the Cold War started in the twilight days of World War II, when America and its allies growing leery and hostile towards the former Soviet Union and communism. More than likely, as anti-communism sentiments and red scares grew amongst the public, the US government and its agencies were given much more leeway and power than intended by legal boundaries. At some point during the 1950s, it seems the higher-ups of these 4 agencies decided to consolidate their agencies' powers independent of the 3 branches of the United States government, going so far as to not involve either the congressional committees or the presidency in their clandestine operations. The NSA, in particular, had a lot of influence with tens of thousands of government employees monitoring all kinds of communications going in and out of the country that covered topics like gossip to even gleaning information about an average person's savings account. The official status of this work and the employees were kept hidden by government bureaucracy and clever usage of officially contracting people through the US Department of Defense. Eventually, the Gang of Four would corrupt other high offices of national government in Congress, the military, the Pentagon, and as speculated by many, the Supreme Court. Eventually, when the first Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, the policies and human rights violations enacted by the Gang of Four abroad in different regions of the world had alienated their European allies, who formed a multinational coalition you may know as the EEC, or European Economic Community, in 1992. The EEC became more powerful than their American allies economically and politically, going so far as to establish friendly diplomatic relationships with the neo-Soviet Union and former Soviet states in direct defiance of the American government's anti-communist policy. Without a communist enemy that united the Western world, many nation-states left the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, isolating the United States. Additionally, the establishment of the Eurodollar, or eddies, as a currency in 1992, and technological advances by the Eurospace Agency and their partner, the Pan-African Alliance, in 1995, would threaten the standing of the American dollar and reputation. The Gang of Four did not exactly react very well to their former allies and now competitor, upstaging them, leading to the so-called Quiet War from 1990 to 1994, with the Gang of Four attempting to sabotage the European Economic Community through stock manipulation, cyber terrorism, and diplomatic blackmail. To make matters worse, the internal domestic affairs of the United States weren't being attended to at all by the Gang of Four that seemed to be throwing a final fit before its eventual death. Homelessness became rampant, terrorist attacks such as the 1993 nuclear bombing of New York's Rockefeller Center would occur, and the rate of violent incidents in the country would keep rising without anything to check it. Foreign policy became foreign hostility, as the Gang of Four would go to extremes in responding to some of the domestic issues, such as the crack epidemic, by releasing a crop virus that destroyed coca and opium crops in Central and South America, which in turn destabilized the economies of the mentioned regions that only worsened the violence and unpredictability of the cartels and paramilitary governments. The European Economic Community saw the American interference in South America and decided to support the drug lords against the American-backed governments, further delaying and bleeding out the Gang of Four's hold on the United States. This wasn't done just to be vindictive, as the EEC had discovered the Gang of Four's prior sabotage of the Europeans, their relations with the neo-Soviets, and the stock market. In fact, the officials of the EEC decided to leak the American activities, in particular stock manipulation, to global media outlets that would lead to the notorious stock market crash of 1994 that would be a factor in the upcoming 4 corporate corporate wars. The stock market crash of '94 caused massive inflation, rapid devaluation of the American dollar, and the already ill symptoms of the American life became even worse. Millions of Americans who lived on pensions and investments found nothing. Their work and savings had simply evaporated. The elderly became homeless or were forced to move in with family. Many Americans died from exposure or violence. The World Bank and the World Stock Exchange, due to the lack of financial trust, were also dissolved, meaning the Gang of Four or any US government, state or federal, had no one to borrow money from. Federal bonds were cashed in at a rate so high that the United States could barely print money fast enough. As riots and civil unrest spread like wildfire across the country, the National Guard and other military assets were deployed in a desperate attempt to control the violence. Things became so bad in the United States that the American military had to close their foreign bases in places such as Japan and South Korea and allocate those troops for more manpower at home. Despite the apparent end of American civilization as they knew it, politicians in Congress needed someone to blame, and there had been suspicions for some time in Congress about a mysterious entity pulling the strings for at least a decade. Out of nowhere on August 17, 1996, the US President James Allen and his Vice President Harold Hunt were assassinated. The then interim President Jonathan Seward justified the subsequent martial law and the suspension of the US Constitution as necessary acts to control the violence in the country. Sometime later, a military intelligence cooperative was established when officials not yet corrupted by the Gang of Four suspected foul play and treachery in the ranks of government. The Gang of Four tried to sabotage this new group that initially suspected only the NSA, although it soon learned that the CIA, FBI, and DEA were in on the cabal. It was discovered by 1997 that the NSA had been withholding tremendous amounts of information, including spy satellite information of potential nuclear war that would occur between Iran and Iraq. The nuclear war actually destroyed most of the Arabian Peninsula, which in turn destroyed much of the world's oil supply and consequently the American access to oil. How such an informational oversight could have occurred prompted investigations under the Seward administration into various agencies, including the Gang of Four. During the wasting plague pandemic, President Seward was assassinated by the NSA, but not before the FBI and DEA were officially dissolved by his administration. The two remaining members of the Gang of Four, the NSA and CIA, would continue to influence the American government until the new US President, William Newell, who had been chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Seward, promised full immunity to those in the CIA in return for the deconstruction of the NSA. In the end, it was discovered that the NSA, which wouldn't be destroyed by the US military until 2008, was responsible for numerous assassinations and illegal operations around the world. Some of its top-level officials are speculated by many to this day to have fled to mega corporations around the world to avoid prosecution. The CIA would also be broken down and reintegrated into the new federal government. At this point in time, however, with the dilapidation of the United States due to the Gang of Four and the events surrounding them, America would never be the same again. States seceded, firestorms raged throughout the continent, and everyday life for the average civilian worsened on every level. The destruction of the United States would set the stage for the rest of history as you and your chooms know it. The new United States or NUSA would form, the metal and corporate wars would further change human civilization, and hundreds of millions would die in the coming decades. But that's a story for another time. If you enjoy Cyberpunk or gaming lore in general, definitely check out the other ones on the channel, and to support us, hit that subscribe and like button. Until next time, stay safe and have fun.